Thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to share some of my projects and experience with you. I think how I'd like to approach this is approach it through a very intimate sharing of some of the projects, looking at smaller spaces, so we're not looking at large organizations, but looking at individual efforts and individual discussions and see how those play out and relate to society later. So here's some of the points that I'd like to cover by the end of the presentation. I think I have about 30 slides. Artworks as durable records for understanding cultures and civilizations. When we look at civilizations that have passed, there's lots of artifacts that we can explore. But the ones we tend to be attracted to are those artifacts that somehow express culture. So ceramics, through cave paintings. Art cannot be divorced from human development. It's always been a part of it. It's almost a human impulse. And how artists work and the materials they use create a snapshot of the technology and the knowledge that we have at one point. So I'll explain some of the projects which hopefully demonstrate that. Artists have always been sort of barometers for issues that exist in society. Their responses to those issues through artworks sort of is like putting your finger in the wind and seeing what temperature it is. And art, like comedy, often has the ability to address very difficult issues. Things that are difficult in conversation, but through the vehicle of art, we're able to come together in many ways and have sort of a sounding board to bounce these issues off. And that would be my first project that I will be going into. And finally, as an artist, I don't make a lot of things that have a lot of monetary value. My individual practice is usually through institutions, and I'm not represented by galleries, so I don't make money off the artwork I create. The important thing for me is to create a conversation through the works. So I believe the first project that I'm going to talk about was in Singapore in 2008, and it dealt with one of those very difficult issues, those traumatic issues. The issue that it dealt with was an uprising in Myanmar in 2007 among the Buddhist clergy and the students that was later put down quite violently. And the following year in Singapore, we created this artwork for the Biennale. The reason why we wanted to create this work in Singapore because Singapore was the chair of ASEAN at that time period. So it was a focal point for a lot of the issues from the previous year. Now this structure is made out of almost 6 tons of sugar. It's about maybe 12 feet high or maybe around 3 meters high. And what we wanted to do with the structure was to build it in public space. The structure was outside for 3 months for the entire duration of the Biennale. And over the 3 months, it eventually melted to nothing. And we wanted this structure to communicate through metaphor the sort of erosion of hope in Myanmar at that time period. And this shows the slow erosion of the structure in the public space over time. I have several different practices. One of them, I'm an educator, but I'm also the director of a small art space called Dia Projects in Ho Chi Minh City. This project works within an ecology of Ho Chi Minh City, mostly contributing through what we know as artistic research. If you were to take a look at the sort of community of artists and practices in my city, now, all of them emerged after 2006. 2006 was a sort of important time period because it was the first time the city embarked on a very large international Biennale level event. And unfortunately, it was a big failure. Before that time, we all suspected that there would be problems with very large, ambitious projects in our city, but nobody ever organized an event and sort of tested that hypothesis. And what we found out that after this sort of implosion, that another way of working was to keep things very small. And so all of the different spaces in my city all have their unique personality, their own strengths, and we all work sort of in concert with each other. And we create something big through individual efforts, but for now, we're not looking to establish citywide international events. My space was started in 2010. It's sort of I guess one way of talking about my space, it's sort of a matchmaking, dating place for artists and creatives. What we do is we have lots of meetings and conversations, and because we have a network, mainly in Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly, we're able to very quickly find out what people are interested in and match them up with other people. And so most of the things that happen in this space are conversations. I also have a residency program, an unofficial residency program, where I have researchers come. So it's not an artist residency. There's not a lot of space, but people that want to come to Southeast Asia and have a temporary base of operations to sort of set up during the daytime while I'm teaching, to conduct meetings, and to do research through the library. There's two spaces. Dia Projects is the meetings place, and Dia Studio is the production place. So here is the studio. And I found that one way of getting to know the value of art is by talking to artists directly. And I think that's what we mostly do at this space, to engage the artists in their ideas, their process, to interrogate them as artists are interrogating the issues. And so we have lots of people come in and out. These people range from students to architects to urban designers and people in unrelated art fields. My practice, my background's in media art. In fact, when I was younger, I did undergraduate research at the MIT Media Lab. Now my practice has very far away from technology. I'm mostly working in natural materials, clay, wood. The library, we have over 3,000 books on art, culture, science, and philosophy that are available for the visitors. And I think this is probably the most important thing that we can offer the city, is this collection of books. In Ho Chi Minh City, we don't really have very strong bookstores. We don't have a Kinokuniya, for example. So it's very hard to get information. It's very expensive to import it in. So over the past 10 years, I've been bringing different types of books through my suitcase and assembling a collection. What I find valuable about small personal libraries is that if you go to a library, the best thing to do is to just browse and not really have an agenda before, an agenda going into the library, but just let yourself wash over the collection. If you use a search engine to find information, you always find what you're looking for. You type in a keyword, you expect sort of a response. However, when you go into a library without searching for something specifically, you find things that you're not looking for. You find things, one thing juxtaposed next to another to create new meanings. It reminds me of the U2 song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Well, the approach is wrong. You should go in and let sort of the material collide. Somebody mentioned beautiful chaos earlier. That's what a library is it's something like beautiful chaos. Most of the projects that we do are speculative in nature, meaning that they don't really have a commercial value. But once in a while, there are some very entrepreneurial people that come through, and they do come up with projects that potentially have value. This is called Helvetica, sort of rubbing off Helvetica, and young type designers coming into the space and redesigning Helvetica for Vietnamese typesetting. Now, Vietnamese, as you can tell from the diacritics, They have very special demands because they have diacritics on the top and the bottom, which create problems for typesetting. So they're trying to reimagine a way to redesign typefaces, but most importantly, after they design them, to release them open source, because they'd like to see them used on the street. And so here's some students trying to radically redesign some of the glyphs for the type. One thing that I'm very interested in is the dialogue between artists and scientists. It's a personal thing. And through the past couple of years, we've had a number of investigations, open-ended investigations, into the relation between art and science. One of these is called Vile Rats. I've teamed up with a Vietnamese philosopher and scientist currently at the City University London, UCL, University College London. And she and I have worked on a number of projects dealing with the sort of dialogue between art and science. The methodologies obviously are different, the scientific method versus the sort of creative process. But this is really nothing new. If we know from our history that artists or designers have always had a foot in both. We can look at Da Vinci, for example. But we can also look at scientists that have yet to develop a codified language for explaining what they're doing, resorting to the visual. So Richard Feynman, for example, the physicist, is known for his Feynman diagrams, which were very controversial when he presented them, but they allowed a breakthrough of new knowledge, not contextualized as art, but as science. Galileo didn't have any way of explaining what Saturn looked like, so in his notes he simply drew it. And even now, we see with more and more complexity and more information available, that the importance of information visualization, to make visual complexity. Now, there have been many different organizations that have been set up to deal with some of these complex issues, some of them partnering industry with education or creation, such as Xerox PARC, and as you'll find out later, the MIT Media Lab. And these are sort of reified, or they become something, through creating organizations or entities. For my practice as an individual artist, I'm not so much interested in creating organizations, but looking at things more speculatively, throwing questions out, bouncing them off people, and seeing what echo returns. And so it doesn't have sort of it's more open-ended, and I'll explain what that is. So this here is a picture. Does anybody know what this is? This is the Large Hadron Collider, the most expensive scientific endeavor in human history. And I believe it was in 2012, it realized what it was made for. It verified the existence of the Higgs boson, which was the last piece in validating the Standard Model. And the Standard Model is basically everything that we know about the physical universe. And it was confirmed. And so this is a momentous sort of an occasion in human development. Several years before that, I was interested in this project, but as an artist, and I can't really explain myself through abstraction, through mathematics. So I use the visual. One thing I noticed about this one component about the Large Hadron Collider, it looked like something familiar, and it looked like this. Now, some of you may not know what the Large Hadron Collider is, but some of you may have seen this, or some of you may have this in your home. What I'm very interested in is reconciling ancient knowledge with contemporary sort of scientific breakthroughs. Oops, sorry. And looking how these two things, separated by time, separated by discipline, engage in a conversation. They're asking the same questions, actually. We know from the Large Hadron Collider, what is the nature of reality? What is this asking? Well, in its own language, it's asking the same thing. And if we look very closely, at times, they may be asking the same thing in almost the same language. For example, if we look at sort of writings in Taoism, the language is quite paradoxical. Sometimes it'll say that things are always in the state of constant motion. They're always moving. Or things can be at one place in another place at the same time, sort of like the yin and the yang, right? Well, that's exactly how science is describing the position of electrons. They're always in motion, but you never know where it is, right? So I found that this dialogue between ancient knowledge and contemporary knowledge is something that might be useful. Maybe I don't have the answer for a product, but as a question, maybe it's worth asking. This is something that you may have seen in a school book as a child from science, looking at the strata of the Earth. And at the very top, we have the crust. And then as we get down into the mantle, we see sort of the pressure increases, and it gets hotter as you get closer to the center of the Earth. But as an artist, I noticed something else. It also looks like, well, let me explain the background. I was doing an exploration of these things called rare earth elements. Rare earth elements they're not necessarily rare, they're just hard to process, but they're a certain section of the periodic table of elements that are used for high technology, such as magnets, for example. But what was interesting is China controls over 99% of the world market of rare earth elements. And so I wanted to start thinking about the relationship between art, on one hand, and as it engages with economies. Oops, 3 minutes in. And so I was looking at an observation that the Earth is like cooking beef. Medium rare, as in rare earth, as you get, it's all about temperature, it's about pressure. And I think somebody mentioned earlier in passing about molecular gastronomy as sort of a creative output. Okay. This project, one way art can be a barometer for testing different questions about the environment. How does art and society, this is the sort of subject, interact? And so this is a sketch. In here, we have a fiberglass housing. Inside, I put honeybees. And the honeybees, through those tubes, would go in and out of the gallery according to their natural rhythm. So they would leave in the morning, and they would come back at night with some pollen. And the speakers would broadcast the drone of the honeybees throughout the space. And so I went about building it, providing some information on the wall. I love science museums, so in that style of education, and filling it with bees, and the bees came in and out of the gallery. Now the sad thing was, this gallery was built in a new development area, and there was questions about how it would affect the ecology of the area, and a lot of bees died during the process. So looking at how art might provide a comment, a very tangible comment on how human development affects ecology. Okay, I'm going to skip very quickly. I'm running out of time. One thing that I'm very interested in is color. I mean, most artists are interested in color, but color specifically as sort of benchmarks through time of what we know. So if we go all the way back to the Paleolithic age, the Stone Age, everything you had, everything you wore, everything you could possibly make with color was restricted to basically 4 colors. And all those 4 colors came from dirt. So it was, mud, clay, and chalk. And even today, those are the same sort of colors that we use today for drawing. So we use sanguine, charcoal, and chalk. And so using these elements, these colors, reflects the state of knowledge that we have on the time. And this morning, when I was reading the paper, and they just awarded the Nobel Prize to 3 Japanese scientists for discovery of blue LEDs. They already had green, and they already had red. But blue was incredibly hard to create. But the creation of blue set a new benchmark in our, basically, scientific development. And I also read that in Europe, they're thinking about banning cadmium paints now because they have an adverse effect on human health. But even through our color chart, we don't even have cadmium yet. So the colors that we have at our disposal reflect our technology, our commerce, and our scientific knowledge at any one point in time. Okay, so my practice now, I mostly work in traditional materials, even though my background's in media art. I'm using those same materials, the same dirt to create form. This is my studio, so if I'm not drawing, I'm a sculptor, so I can quickly create sculpture. And the Dia Studio is the production space, and I'm at the end. So if anybody has any questions further, I'm happy to answer on a one-to-one discussion. Thank you.